Imagine the unthinkable. A courtroom, justice's sacred hall. Witnesses and officers strike 17-year-old Leon right before a seemingly complicit judge. The system feels like a suffocating trap. But then, a shadow falls. A quiet presence enters. Leon's father, Marcus Thorne. He utters no immediate word, yet his arrival unleashes a silent earthquake. For Thorne is no ordinary parent. He's the deputy director of the CIA, and he's come for far more than just his son. Brace yourself as we delve into how one man's quiet power and a father's fierce love dismantled a corrupt system, beginning with a single damning slap that echoed far beyond those courtroom walls. The air in courtroom 3B was thick enough to choke on, heavy with unspoken verdicts and the stale scent of institutional despair. Officer Miller, a man whose face seemed permanently set in a granite scowl, didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. With a chilling economy of motion, he simply struck the 17-year-old Leon Washington across the face. The crack of flesh meeting flesh echoed unnaturally in the sudden absolute silence. Right there, in front of the Honorable Judge Harriet Cole. The courtroom froze. A collective intake of breath, a silent gasp that hung suspended. Leon didn't cry out. He didn't flinch, not visibly. He slowly, deliberately, wiped a smear of crimson from the corner of his lip with the back of his cuffed hand. His gaze, steady and unnervingly calm, drifted towards the heavy oak doors at the rear of the courtroom. They were just swinging shut. His father had just stepped through. And suddenly, everything changed. What would you do if you saw your child, your blood, assaulted in the very chamber meant to dispense justice? This father, a tall man with an aura of quiet command, didn't bellow. He didn't lunge, didn't utter a single threat. He just walked in, his presence a palpable force, and shifted the entire gravitational pull of the room without saying a word. Comment below. Because sometimes the most profound statements are delivered in the deafening roar of silence. You could feel it the moment you stepped into that courtroom earlier. It wasn't just the silence. It was the oppressive weight of eyes that had already decided. They stared, dissecting him before he even reached the defendant's table. Leon Washington, 17, his wrists bound by gleaming steel, flanked by two deputies whose expressions were as impassive as the polished marble floor. Not a syllable from him, not a single tear. Just the quiet, measured fall of his shoes, each step sounding like a drumbeat in the suddenly too loud space. Someone behind me, a woman clutching a worn purse, whispered, "He must have done something terrible." And just like that, with the ease of a flicked switch, he was guilty in the eyes of the room. Officer Miller took the stand, swaggering with the confidence of a man who'd performed this ritual countless times. Calm, certain. He didn't spare Leon a glance. Why would he? He had the badge, the unyielding bench behind him, the system itself as wind at his sails. He laid it out, his voice a monotone drone. He resisted, got mouthy. I had to restrain him, like he was reading a grocery list, not detailing the alleged prelude to a life-altering charge. Judge Cole nodded, a cursory dip of her head, her gaze barely lifting from her notes. That nod. That was the real sentence, wasn't it? You could feel the air thicken, growing heavier with each passing second. Leon just sat there, still, not rigid with fear, not trembling with rage, just contained, as if he'd rehearsed this scene in a nightmare 1,000 times. His cuffed hands rested in his lap, his dark eyes focused, unblinking. He looked at Officer Miller, and for a fleeting moment, a mere flicker, he tilted his head. Then, his voice, quiet, but carrying, sliced through the stagnation. "Is this your interpretation of the law, officer?" No threat, no insolence, just a question. But it landed with the force of a physical blow. Officer Miller froze, for perhaps half a second. Then a dark flush crept up his neck. He stepped down from the stand. 1 step, 2. And right there, under the painted gaze of Lady Justice on the mural above, without a flicker of warning, he backhanded Leon Washington across the face. You could hear the shock ripple through the room, a collective gasp, a stifled cry from somewhere in the public gallery. But no one moved. Not the bailiff, his hand hovering near his sidearm. Not Judge Cole, her eyes widening almost imperceptibly. Just silence. A stunned, breathless silence. Leon didn't cry. He didn't raise his voice. He slowly brought his hand up, wiped the fresh trickle of blood from his split lip, and then astonishingly, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. He looked Officer Miller directly in the eyes, his gaze steady, unshaken. "You just made a mistake, officer," he said, his voice still low, yet it resonated louder than any gavel's crack in that room. "A mistake you will regret for the rest of your life." The slap had landed, yes. But Leon Washington, he didn't crumble. He didn't react as anyone expected. No tears, no shouts of outrage, just a profound stillness, the kind that makes a room deeply, uncomfortably nervous. As if he knew, with a certainty that chilled the blood, that this wasn't even the worst part. They called a recess. People murmured, shifting in their seats, the spell momentarily broken. Judge Cole swept from the room without a backward glance. And then they brought in the court-appointed defense, Ms. Anya Sharma. She wasn't new to this building, nor to the grim procession of young lives churned through its unforgiving gears. She walked over, her heels clicking softly against the worn linoleum, and crouched beside Leon, careful not to crowd his space. "I'm Anya," she said, her voice gentle. "They've asked me to represent you. Can you tell me your name?" He glanced sideways, a slow, measured movement. And for the first time since he'd walked into that hostile arena, he spoke more than a few words. "Names don't mean anything in here. No attitude, no defiance. Just a profound, weary experience. The voice of someone who'd seen this place devour names and spit out numbers." Anya studied him. He didn't look scared, not even overtly angry, just heavy, as if an invisible weight, something no one else could perceive, was pressing down on him. "Still," she said, her tone soft, "I'd like to know what to call you." A pause, then a sigh, almost inaudible. "Leon Washington." She jotted it down, her pen scratching in the sudden quiet. Ran it through her mental database, her quick notes, no priors, no red flags. But that only deepened her curiosity, because something about this young man didn't align with the sterile data on the paperwork. He wasn't fidgeting, wasn't defensive. His body didn't speak of fear. It spoke of a preternatural control, the kind that is meticulously taught, not instinctively born. And that's when she noticed it. A thin, almost invisible silver chain, tucked just beneath the collar of his county-issued shirt. Not flashy, not for show. Just something he wore close, intimately, almost as if it wasn't meant for anyone else's eyes. Anya didn't mean to pry, but it caught the anemic courtroom light as he shifted slightly. Her eyes, trained for detail, caught the minute engraving on a tiny rectangular tag attached to it. Washington, Omega Division, CIA. Her breath hitched. She didn't say anything. Not yet. She just looked back at him, at his young, composed face. He saw it in her eyes, the flicker of recognition. Knew she'd read it. And without a word he reached up with his cuffed hands, a surprisingly graceful movement, tucked the chain deeper into his shirt, and turned his gaze away. Not hiding, just done explaining. "Whatever you think that means," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper, "it doesn't change how they see me in here." That was the precise moment Anya Sharma realized He wasn't trying to win this case. He was just trying to survive it. They say a court recess is for catching your breath, for regrouping. But for Leon Washington, it felt like just the next round in a fight he hadn't started. Judge Cole had vanished into her chambers. Most of the onlookers drifted into hushed conversations, tapping at phones, sipping lukewarm coffee from paper cups. But Leon, he sat alone at the defense table, still cuffed. And that's when two uniformed officers ambled over. Not quickly, not loudly, just casual, like they were on a routine stroll. "We're doing a random sweep," one of them said, his voice flat, devoid of inflection. "Protocol. Protocol." Right there, in the middle of the still-occupied courtroom, they yanked open his tattered backpack, tore through his notebook, scattering loose papers, dumped out his pens, a cheap pack of ballpoints, unzipped every pocket with a methodical, almost bored thoroughness, as if they were certain contraband was cowering within. They even pulled out a sandwich, wrapped neatly in foil, and tossed it aside like refuse. And he just sat there, watching them dismantle the meager pieces of a life already judged, already condemned in their eyes. Anya shot to her feet. "He's not under arrest for possession. You have no grounds to—" They cut her off, their voices overlapping. "Ma'am, we're just doing our job. You can file a complaint later." Later. Always later. That word was a brick wall, erected every time you tried to breathe, to assert a right. One of the officers scribbled something onto a clipboard, tore off the sheet with a flourish, and slapped it down beside the ransacked contents of the backpack. Suspicious behavior. Filed. No drugs, no weapons, no anything. But still, a mark. Another stain. Leon didn't move, didn't protest. He reached over slowly and began to pack his things back into the backpack, one by one, with a careful precision that spoke of long, hard practice, muscle memory. That's when the second officer, younger, maybe early 30s, leaned towards his partner and muttered, loud enough for the hushed room to hear, "Look at him. Future lifer, not a student." Time didn't stop, but hearts did. Even Anya froze, her protest dying on her lips. And Leon, he just zipped the bag shut, his eyes downcast, as if he knew this part of the script by heart. Then Officer Miller strolled back in, arms crossed, that same crooked, unpleasant smile playing on his lips. He tossed a folded sheet of paper onto the judge's bench, which Judge Cole had just reoccupied. "Your Honor," Miller announced, his voice dripping with smug satisfaction, "I'd like to add resisting arrest and obstruction to the report. The defendant became uncooperative during transport." Judge Cole barely glanced at the paper. Didn't ask a single question of clarification. Didn't even look at the boy whose fate she held in her hands. She simply adjusted her glasses, clicked her pen with a decisive snap. "Charges noted, added to the docket." Just like that. And then she said it. So calm, so bureaucratic, as if she were adding an extra topping to a pizza order that was already on its way. Sometimes, Mr. Miller, you have to treat them like what they are inevitably going to become. The room didn't gasp this time, because they weren't surprised, only sickened. Anya clenched her jaw so hard her teeth ached. Leon didn't flinch. And I remember sitting there, a knot tightening in my own chest, thinking, he wasn't just on trial for an alleged crime. He was being told, in no uncertain terms, who he was allowed to become. By the time court resumed fully, Anya Sharma was ready. She'd been quiet during the last chaotic break, but anyone watching her closely could see something had shifted. Not fear, not panic. Focus. A sharp, dangerous focus. She walked to the center of the courtroom, a small flash drive held delicately in her hand, the way a surgeon might hold a scalpel. There was no tremor in her fingers, no grandiloquent speech. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady, clear, cutting through the lingering miasma of injustice. "I have new evidence, recorded from a civilian-owned security camera on the corner of Elmwood and 4th Avenue." Judge Cole raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, but didn't speak. "It shows the incident Officer Miller described," Anya continued, "and, Your Honor, it tells a profoundly different story." She handed the flash drive to the clerk, who, after a moment of fumbling, plugged it into the court's monitor. The screen flickered, then stabilized. The footage played. It wasn't Hollywood clear, a bit grainy, the colors washed out. But it didn't need to be. There, in the jerky, silent video, was Leon. Standing, not aggressively, but protectively, between Officer Miller and an elderly black woman who looked terrified, confused, leaning heavily on a cane. The woman was saying something, inaudible on the tape, but her expression was pleading. Miller shoved her hard. The old woman stumbled backward, dangerously. And Leon, just a kid, caught her. He didn't throw a punch. He didn't yell. He simply stood between them, holding out both arms, a human shield. That was it. That was the resistance, the mothiness. And in that moment, you could feel the entire room collectively stop breathing. Even a few of the jurors, previously slumped in disinterest, leaned forward, their eyes riveted to the screen. It was clear, devastatingly clear. Anya looked directly at Judge Cole. "This footage, Your Honor, directly contradicts Officer Miller's sworn testimony. It unequivocally shows that my client, Leon Washington, acted to prevent harm, not to cause it." For a breathtaking moment, it felt like something had cracked open. Like maybe, just maybe, today would be different. But then, Judge Harriet Cole leaned back in her high-backed leather chair, removed her glasses, and slowly, deliberately, wiped them with a silk cloth. Without looking up, without even a glance at the damning evidence still frozen on the screen, she said, her voice flat, "Unverified footage. Dismissed. No explanation. No pause for consideration. Just like that. The truth, caught on camera, was filed away. Dismissed as irrelevant. You could hear it. That specific sound a room makes when hope, fragile and tentative, falls flat on the unyielding floor. Not a gasp, not a cry. Just a heavy, suffocating disappointment. Like watching someone meticulously bury a body they had sworn, moments before, to protect. Anya stood frozen for half a second, disbelief warring with a rising tide of fury. But Officer Miller smiled, wider, more openly triumphant than he had all morning. "It's always not their fault," he sneered, loud enough for the entire courtroom to hear. "Right up until the moment they're in handcuffs." That was when Leon looked up. For the first time since that second, brutal slap. He lifted his head, his young face a mask of weary resignation, yet with an undercurrent of something else, something unbreakable. And he spoke, quietly, not for dramatic effect, but with a profound, almost ancient weight. "You're not the first to try and bury the truth, Your Honor," he said, his gaze fixed on Judge Cole. "But I might just be the last one you managed to keep buried." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They just landed, settled, and that was when it started. The subtle shifting in the seats, the renewed angry murmurs, the distinct tightening in the chest of every person in that room who had ever seen someone like Leon, young, black, and presumed guilty, pushed down and told, explicitly or implicitly, to stay there. People weren't just watching anymore. They were feeling. They were angry. But Leon, he went quiet again, hands folded, eyes steady. And for the first time, the courtroom wasn't just judging him. It was watching him, waiting. After the footage was so callously dismissed, Anya Sharma sat back down. But she didn't let it go. Her eyes remained fixed on Leon, trying to decipher the silence he wore like a second skin. He hadn't looked overtly angry, hadn't slouched in defeat, hadn't even blinked when Judge Cole waved away the visual truth like an irritating fly. But something had shifted. You could feel it in the charged air. Anya leaned towards him, not to push, not to pry, just to let him know she was still there, still in his corner. That's when he slid a small, folded piece of paper towards her across the polished wood of the defense table. No eye contact, no discernible urgency. She unfolded it. One line, written in a neat, surprisingly steady hand. Watch. Don't act. Not yet. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a desperate question. It was a directive. And for a disorienting split second, Anya wasn't sure who was truly defending whom. Then she noticed it. The almost imperceptible way he adjusted his sleeve. Slow, deliberate, revealing the watch beneath. At first glance, nothing unusual. Plain black band, simple metal clasp, digital face. But Anya, with her sharp eyes and sharper instincts, had seen that model before. Exactly that model. Issued by certain clandestine branches of the government to family members of operatives working in highly volatile, high-risk assignments. One tap could send a silent, geolocated distress signal. 2 taps could send more. Much more. She said nothing, just looked at him. He didn't return her glance, just leaned back slightly, calm, still, as if he knew exactly how much time was left on the clock. Somewhere in the back row, a man shifted in his seat. Not loudly, not nervously. He sat in the corner, a few rows behind the press box. Dark, impeccably tailored suit, no tie, crisp white shirt. Ramrod straight posture, hands clasped loosely in front of him. His eyes, keen and assessing, never left Leon. Not once. Most wouldn't have given him a second glance. But if you did notice him, if you truly looked, you'd realize something right away. He wasn't watching out of mere concern or even familial anxiety. He was watching like someone waiting for a very specific, predetermined confirmation. Director Marcus Thorne, no relation to the judge but a name that carried its own immense weight in certain circles, had just subtly altered the room's dynamics. But the room, for the most part, didn't know it yet. And Leon, he didn't look back. Didn't need to. Because silence, when chosen, when wielded with intent, is often louder, more potent than any outburst. And sometimes staying perfectly still is how you prepare to turn everything upside down. You could tell Officer Miller thought the courtroom was his kingdom again. He leaned back against the witness rail with that familiar, insolent smirk, the kind that came from a deeply ingrained certainty that no one would or could stop him. Not here, not now, not with that badge pinned to his chest. The video had been tossed. The truth, it seemed, buried yet again. And the boy, Leon, still sitting there, still silent, still cuffed. So Miller did what men like him always do when they believe the story has reached its foregone conclusion. He taunted, "No one's here to save you, boy." He didn't shout it, didn't need to. He said it with a casual, dismissive ease that conveyed his absolute belief in its truth. He believed it so deeply, he didn't even bother to look around first. And for a suspended heartbeat, he was right. Nobody moved. Not Judge Cole, her face a mask of judicial impartiality. Not the bailiff. Not the murmuring crowd. Until one chair scraped softly against the worn floor tiles at the very back of the room. You could barely hear it, but in the profound, anticipatory silence, it sounded like a thunderclap. A man stood, slow, composed, wearing that dark suit, no tie, the clean white shirt. The kind of commanding presence that doesn't announce itself with noise, but takes over a room simply by existing within it. He walked down the central aisle, not rushed, not hesitant, like he belonged there, like he knew with absolute certainty exactly where this path led. Some folks turned, curious. Others stared, intrigued. But Leon Washington didn't move, not even a flicker of a glance back, because he knew. He'd known all along. The man reached the front row, paused for a fraction of a second, then stepped into the open space between the gallery and the bar, and in a voice firm but low, so low it made everyone unconsciously lean in, he said, "I am." Just 2 words. But they cut clean through the stagnant courtroom air like a shard of ice. Officer Miller blinked, stiffened. Then, almost instinctively, he straightened his shoulders, trying to cling to whatever vestiges of authority he thought he still possessed. But the man was already reaching into the inner pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a slim black leather badge case. Slow, intentional. He flipped it open. Gold glinted, catching the dim courtroom lights. Not ostentatiously, but with a quiet, irrefutable finality. Marcus Thorne, Deputy Director, Central Intelligence Agency. The words hit like thunder, muffled in velvet. No shouting, no melodrama. Just truth, presented plainly, unadorned. There was a pause. Not in the sentence, but in the very air itself. A deep, stretched silence, as if the room, the entire building, needed a moment to process, to understand the seismic shift it had just witnessed. Then it happened. One juror audibly gasped, hand flying to her mouth. A reporter in the press box dropped her pen, the clatter unnaturally loud. The court clerk looked up, her face a mask of confused astonishment. And Judge Cole. She froze, utterly. Officer Miller didn't speak. His face, suddenly pale, slack-jawed, said enough. Because in that precise, earth-shattering moment, the balance of power tilted. Everything he'd built, the smirks, the casual brutality, the comfortable impunity, slipped, shattered, and fell away. Director Thorne didn't look at Miller, not yet. He turned his gaze, slow, deliberate, to meet Judge Cole's, eyes steady, shoulders squared, and then softly, yet with the undeniable weight of federal law and unspoken global power behind every syllable, he said, "You silenced my son." A pause, not for dramatic effect, for clarity. Now you will hear the sound of accountability. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a performance. It was a statement of fact, undeniable, unstoppable. Judge Cole didn't blink, didn't breathe, just stared back, her carefully constructed composure crumbling, her face paling to a chalky white. Leon turned just slightly in his seat, still cuffed, still grounded. He looked over his shoulder, not surprised, not smug, and a smile, a genuine faint curl of the lips touched his mouth, a fleeting moment of softness beneath all that hard-won silence. Then, barely loud enough for Anya Sharma to hear, he murmured, "Told you someone would notice." No one else spoke. No one dared. Because for the first time since Leon Washington had entered that room, a boy presumed guilty. He was no longer the one being watched with judgment. The watchers had become the watched. The room was still reeling, a palpable shockwave humming through the air. But Director Marcus Thorne didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He stepped forward slowly, each movement deliberate, measured. Not as a father pleading for his son, but as a man who understood the immense weight of true authority and knew precisely how to wield it. "Your Honor," he said calmly, his gaze locked on Judge Cole, "I am formally requesting a special evidentiary hearing." There was a pause, thick with unspoken tension. Judge Cole looked down at her bench, then back at Director Thorne, her attempt at composure visibly failing. "On what grounds, Director?" Marcus Thorne didn't blink. "On grounds of prosecutorial misconduct, clear judicial bias, and the blatant falsification of testimony by Officer Miller." And just like that, the entire atmosphere of the courtroom inverted. Anya Sharma stood, her voice now clear and precise, resonating with newfound confidence. "Your Honor, we are resubmitting the verified footage. It has been reviewed, authenticated, and its chain of custody confirmed by technical experts from the Central Intelligence Agency. It irrefutably confirms that my client, Leon Washington, intervened solely to prevent the use of excessive force against an unarmed, elderly civilian." A hush deeper this time fell over the room as the screen lit up again. The same grainy video, but now overlaid with an official-looking timestamp, a case file number, and a discreet CIA watermark in the corner. You could see Officer Miller, his face contorted in anger, shoving the old woman. You could see Leon stepping in, shielding her. There was no mistaking it. No room for dismissal. When the video ended, Marcus Thorne, without a word, pulled out another thicker folder from his briefcase. He handed it to the stunned court clerk. "These," he stated, his voice even, "are internal affairs documents, cross-referenced with federal oversight reports. 3 separate, credible incidents over the last 5 years involving Officer Daniel Miller. Each one flagged for excessive force and misconduct. Each one mysteriously buried." He looked directly at Judge Cole, his eyes like chips of ice. "All 3 of those cases, Your Honor, were scheduled for judicial review before this very bench. All 3 were dismissed in pretrial hearings by you." Judge Cole stiffened, her hand hovering over her gavel as if by instinct. But she didn't strike it. She couldn't. Because this wasn't just her courtroom anymore. Not really. It was a reckoning. Marcus Thorne took one final deliberate step forward. "By order of federal authority," he said, his voice now a shade louder, undeniably firm, "Officer Daniel Miller, you are under arrest for obstruction of justice, abuse of power, and falsifying official records." Gasps. A sudden flash of motion. 2 federal agents dressed in similar dark suits materialized from a side door, stepping into view like shadows called forth by the irrefutable weight of truth. Officer Miller tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound emerged. The cuffs went on, not fast, not rough, just final. In front of everyone. In front of the judge who had enabled him. In front of the young man he had so arrogantly dismissed as powerless. Judge Cole sat frozen, the color completely drained from her face. She looked at Marcus Thorne, then at Anya Sharma, then briefly at Leon Washington. But she didn't say a word, didn't defend herself, didn't apologize. She just lowered her gaze to her trembling hands and said nothing at all. Because sometimes silence isn't power. Sometimes it's surrender. The moment the federal cuffs clicked shut on Officer Miller's wrists, the phones came up. Quietly at first, then all at once. A hesitant wave. The subtle, almost furtive sound of video recordings being made filled the room, like the first drops of rain after a long, oppressive drought. Within minutes, the footage was online. A shaky, illicitly captured clip of Officer Miller being arrested, hands cuffed behind his back, his face pale as chalk, being led away by stern-faced federal agents. The caption, rapidly typed, read, "Tied to truth. Justice for Leon W." It started small. A few dozen retweets, a handful of TikToks, raw and unedited. Then it grew. By noon, it was everywhere. News anchors, their faces grim, replayed the courtroom moment. Facebook live streams erupted with comments. TikTok duets stitched the scene with expressions of shock and outrage. Twitter threads unspooled, meticulously dissecting every frame. Hashtags stacked, one over another. Show us justice for Leon W. Wax, silence is power CIA. Watch the courtroom fall. Truth uncuffed. What happened inside the 4 walls of courtroom 3B was no longer confined. It spilled out, flooding living rooms, news feeds, and dinner table conversations across the nation, and then, astonishingly, across the globe. People weren't just watching. They were remembering. They were recognizing patterns, some in disbelief, others in raw empathetic pain, but most with a dawning potent sense of something long overdue, something inevitable, finally catching up. In the gallery, the elderly black woman from the video, who had been quietly brought in by an aide to Director Thorne, stood up slowly. She hadn't spoken all day, her presence a silent testament. But now, as the agents led a dazed Officer Miller out in cuffs, she whispered, her voice trembling but clear. He didn't raise his voice, but his silence hit louder than any gavel. And she was right, because Leon Washington didn't yell. He didn't beg. He just waited, embodying a strength that unnerved and ultimately undid his oppressors. And when the truth, heavily armed and undeniable, finally showed up, he met it like he'd been expecting it the whole time. That fleeting, almost invisible clip of him smiling just before his father's identity was revealed, just before Miller's arrest, that smile became a symbol, a screenshot, a quiet, powerful movement. The CIA, usually shrouded in opacity, responded with uncharacteristic swiftness, confirming Director Thorne's presence and the internal matter now under federal jurisdiction. An internal review of all judicial decisions made by Judge Harriet Cole over the past 5 years, particularly those involving dismissed misconduct charges against law enforcement, was announced by the Justice Department before sunset. The dominoes had started falling, not out of rage, but out of a silence that had finally, resoundingly, been heard. And for once, justice didn't have to scream to be felt. It simply arrived. The massive bronze doors of the federal courthouse opened, and the world, it seemed, was waiting. A barrage of camera flashes, a cacophony of reporters leaning forward, microphones thrust out like weapons, a wall of questions shouted over each other, all blending into a kind of frantic, overwhelming noise. But Leon Washington didn't rush. He stepped out slowly beside his father, blinking into the harsh afternoon daylight as if its sudden brightness didn't surprise him in the least. Someone from the front, a young female reporter with a determined glint in her eye, pushed her voice above the din. Leon, why didn't you speak up sooner? Why didn't you say who your father was?" Leon paused, not to think, not to formulate an answer, just to let the noise settle, to allow the silence he was about to offer to find its space. Then, he said, his voice soft but carrying clearly over the fading clamor, "Because when justice is finally ready to speak for you, you don't need to yell." It wasn't a slogan. It wasn't defiance. It was the kind of profound, simple answer that only comes from someone who has learned to listen to the immense weight of his own silence and found an unshakable power within it. Marcus Thorne stood beside him, his hands clasped behind his back, shoulders tall. He looked over at his son, not as a deputy director of the CIA, not as a man of title or immense authority, but just as a father who had perhaps missed too many moments that mattered, in service to a different kind of duty. Then he spoke, his voice just loud enough for Leon to hear, a private admission in a very public space. "I missed too much of your childhood, son, but I damn sure wasn't going to miss witnessing your courage." Leon didn't reply. He just nodded once, a small, almost imperceptible acknowledgement. And they walked, no hand on a shoulder, no arms linked, just two men, father and son, moving side by side, step for step, not toward a press conference, not toward a fleeting headline, but toward a different kind of history, a history they were now writing together. Behind them, someone in the crowd started clapping, then another, and soon the sound swelled, not like the roar of a stadium, but like respect, quiet and warm and proud, rising up from the city sidewalk. They didn't wave, didn't stop, because this wasn't about the crowd. It was about every young person who'd been told to sit down and shut up. Every parent who thought they'd waited too long or couldn't do enough. Every truth that had been buried beneath layers of uniforms, bureaucracy, and silence, and now, finally, was walking free. They had tried to silence a boy, but in doing so, they had awakened a generation. If this story moved you, even just a little, then maybe it's because deep down, we all want to believe the silence can still speak volumes. That dignity, quiet and unyielding, can still change the room, can still change the world. Leon Washington didn't fight with noise. He stood with purpose, and in doing so, he reminded us all. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks in quietly, stands tall, and simply is. If you believe in stories that matter, stories that reflect courage, truth, and the profound power of quiet strength, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Chronicles of Resilience for more narratives that speak to the heart. Your support means everything. Every view, every comment, every share. It fuels the work we do and reminds us why we do it. Because here, we don't just tell stories. We tell the kind of stories people remember. The kind that sit with you long after the screen goes dark. Thank you for watching. Thank you for feeling. And thank you for walking this journey with us. What an incredible journey of justice, wouldn't you agree? Did Leon's quiet resilience or Director Thorne's commanding presence resonate more with you? When have you witnessed silence speak louder than any outcry? Share your reflections in the comments below. We genuinely value your insights. If stories like this, tales of courage, truth, and the quiet power that can reshape worlds are what you seek, then please consider liking this video, sharing it, and most importantly, subscribing to my channel. Your support fuels these narratives. Don't miss what's next.